My realization of what's in my way to my thought leadership on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. A couple of weeks ago, I did an episode with one of our clients from our Thought Leader Academy, Betsy Jordyn. And we talked about Betsy's realization, which she shared in her graduation speech, that what I thought was in my way to my thought leadership was the way to my thought leadership. And I loved when she said that in her speech, and I quickly wrote it down. And we talked about that and her realization in that episode from a couple of weeks ago. The idea is that what holds us back, where we get stuck, what we're putting off doing, what we're afraid to talk about could be precisely what we need to do, because our audiences will relate to our struggles, and even as important, we will grow by pushing past the doubts and the fears that we have. So since that time, I've been reflecting about what is holding me back. And I have a couple of instances over the past year that have jumped out at me that have reminded me of this. And it really has been conversations that I've had with my business coaches. So I remember last summer, 2020, I had a conversation with one of them, and she said to me at some point during our session, Carol, your audience wants you to step up as a thought leader. And I kind of, I stopped and I was like, I knew she was right, even though internally I was resisting, I put together all this podcast content and I write my email newsletter and all this. And she's like, no, Carol, you hide behind Speaking Your Brand a lot. You need to be more as Carol. And so then from that conversation, that was one of the things that prompted us to do our Brave, Bold, Beyond Live virtual summit in October of 2020. And then we launched our Thought Leader Academy from there. And then in April of this year, April 2021, we did our Brave, Bold, Beyond Live virtual summit for the second time. And just like the first one, it was extraordinary. The speakers that we selected who delivered their 10-minute TED-style talks were absolutely extraordinary, heartfelt, they sharing their personal stories and their big ideas and how much work that they put into it. The attendees raved at both events that it was the best online events that they've ever attended. And so I know that we did such a great job with those summits, our speaking coaches, our team here, and all of that. And yet, I also know that in those summits that I, as Carol, I as the face and the voice of Speaking Your Brand, was not as visible, was not as present as I could have been, or perhaps I should have been. And so I'm going to talk today about kind of that realization. And I've also been having some other conversations with another business coach over the past couple of months who has pointed out the same thing. So I think what it comes down to is that even though this seems counterintuitive or perhaps ironic, maybe even a little ridiculous, but I don't really like being in the spotlight. I really enjoy shining the spotlight on other women. And this aligns so much with what our mission here at Speaking Your Brand is, which is to champion and amplify diverse women's voices and visibility so that they get onto stages, so that they get representation, so that their voices are heard, because that's such an important part of what fuels me, what drives me. I enjoy shining the spotlight on other women, which is fine. Which I want to continue to do, and that's not going to change. But I recognize that I too often push the spotlight away from myself, and I don't need to do that as well. And again, this seems kind of ironic because I've been speaking on stages for all of my life, really, high school, college, and then into my career. I've been a political analyst on TV for the past 15 years. I've been doing this podcast for 4.5 years. So yes, my face and my voice are out there. Yet I have examples, which I will share with you in this episode, of ways that I don't like the spotlight on me and how I've determined that where that came from and what I'm going to do differently going forward. I want to let you know now, before we get further into the episode that our Thought Leader Academy will be open for enrollment again in September. I would love to have you join us if you're looking for a structured curriculum to go through to identify your thought leadership message, to work on your signature talk, both for lead generation and your story-driven TED style, keynote style talk, to work on your visibility and your revenue, to really evolve from an expert into a thought leader. That's the transformation that we help the women in our Thought Leader Academy with. You can get the details and get on our interest list or enroll, depending on when you're listening to this episode, by going to speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Spaces are limited to 10 to 12 women, as we like to keep it hands-on and intimate. So if you are interested, be sure to go get on the interest list. You get both one-on-one coaching and the weekly group Zoom calls. So it really is the best of both worlds. It's training, it's coaching, it's masterminding, it's support, it's accountability. It's everything you need to take yourself from that well-regarded, high-achieving expert and putting the spotlight a bit on you as a thought leader. So as we go through this episode, I'm going to share with you my realization. And then at the end, I'm also going to share with you the questions that I've been asking myself that you can start asking yourself as well. So as I mentioned already, I don't really like having the spotlight on me. I'm much more willing to have it shine on someone else, or really to, should I say, share the spotlight. So I've been thinking about, well, where could this have come from? And I have pinpointed a few different places. The first thing is growing up. I remember I spent a lot of time with my paternal grandmother. We would spend weekends together, holidays, summer vacations, etc. And so she would, during all that time together, and this is obviously in the 1980s, so no computers, no smartphones, a few TV channels, not a whole lot. So I would read a lot when I would go to visit, but we would just talk. She would tell me stories about our family, about relatives who were living, relatives who had long passed. And she gave, such great insights into family dynamics and growing up. And my favorite stories were about her and what her life had been like, obviously before I knew her as my grandmother. And funny enough, her name was also Carol Cox. I'm named after her. Now, she had the last name Cox when she was married to her first husband, my grandfather. And then she ended up getting divorced from him and marrying someone else. So her last name ended up changing. But for a time, she was also a Carol Cox. And I remember her telling me that when she was very young, before she got married for the first time, that she really wanted to be an actress. But she couldn't, because her family, in no uncertain terms, said, no, a young, respectable lady like yourself is not going to go to Beverly Hills and be an actress. And she grew up in Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia, and her parents said absolutely not. So she kind of went to a finishing school after high school, which is really kind of like what you do before you get married, at least in that era, which would have been the 1940s. And so really was not seen as respectable or acceptable for her to be an actress. So I kind of these things, went into my mind as a young child, being an actress, performing, having the spotlight on you is something that our family does not do, or our family does not regard highly. Now, interestingly, my family was entrepreneurs on both my dad's side, so my grandmother's parents, and then on my mom's side, her parents both had businesses and entrepreneurs, so perhaps I got that streak from them. I do remember, though, when I was young, I loved to perform. I was in school plays when I was in elementary school. One of my very favorite activities ever was in 7th grade. We had a group project, and this was actually one of those group projects that turned out well. Not one of those ones where us as the high achievers would end up doing all the work. This one went well, where we had to pick a country. I think it was social studies class. We picked a country, then we researched the country, and then we had to perform a skit in front of the class about that country. And so our country was Egypt. So we did a lot of research on it, the history, the geography, the government, and so on. And then we did a skit and we performed in front of the class. And at the time, Walk Like an Egyptian by the Bangles was really popular. So of course, we incorporated that song into our skit. And now thinking back, I think that song was probably what we would call a cultural appropriation, but this was the 1980s, so a much different time period. So I loved doing that. And then in high school, I did speech and debate team. And then in college, I was in the Model United Nations Club. So we would do speeches. I went to New York City, went to the United Nations there for one of their mock UN events. So I really loved to do all of this stuff. So that was really a part of me, and innate in my personality, or just innate in what I enjoyed doing. So then at the age of 30, I became chairperson of my county's Democratic Party. It's known as the Democratic Executive Committee, or DEC for short. So if I use the acronym DEC, that's what it stands for. So I became chairperson because the other members of the executive committee really pushed me to run for chairperson. So I ended up doing that because I had been involved in local politics. And as the chairperson, I was very much front and center as the face and the voice of the party. And I was really good at it. Like, this is the time where I know it feels like self-indulgent to brag about this, but obviously I had a team, and this was all volunteers. I was a volunteer position. Everyone in this party organization were volunteers, but we were really good at it. And I was really good at driving the vision of what we could accomplish. We were creative. We were innovative. I was outspoken. This is how I ended up being a political analyst on TV news, was from my role as chairperson. When I came into the party as chairperson, we had $18 in the bank for the entire organization. By the time that I left, after we had run through an election cycle, we had raised $35,000 to help candidates run for office. I mean, $18 to $35,000 was huge. The county party had never done anything like that before. We ran PR campaigns. We ran Women for Local Office. I went on TV. We actually produced a TV commercial for the party that ran on Central Florida airwaves at the time to encourage people to vote for the Democratic candidates. So even though we were a small county within the state of Florida, we made a huge impact. The big wigs in Florida, the big wigs in DC took notice of what I was doing, what we were doing, and they started reaching out to us and reaching out to me, and even had some initial conversations about having me run for Congress. But obviously I didn't run for Congress. Here I am. So all that was great until it wasn't, because there was a backlash that started brewing. All of a sudden I started hearing like little whispers and things at our county party meetings and events. Oh, there's Carol and her news crew again. Because my husband loves to loves to film. So he would film all of our meetings and events because we would use it for the events that we were doing. We would use it for email campaigns. This was kind of before social media as well. So we would use all that video footage. Plus, we just wanted it for my archive. But other people didn't like that because they felt like the spotlight was too much on me, even though I was trying to distribute it to everyone else and running these other women for office as well. But this thing with there's Carol and her news crew, like, it stuck. Like, I still remember it to this day. And I shared more details of the story in my summit speech from April. And I'll include a link to that video in the show notes here. So if you want to go check out that story and that video. So really, I see it that I was penalized for having the spotlight on me. So I decided not to run for another term as chairperson. And I just withdrew. I withdrew from local politics, kind of just withdrew from just putting myself out there. I say that I lost my voice for several years. I really just lost my confidence and I lost my desire to put myself out there. And I just kind of wanted to, lick my wounds and then just go and just continue my business and figure out what to do next. And really what I see happen is I overcorrected. And just like an athlete, when an athlete is doing something, and they overcorrect because they did something and then they're trying to kind of like compensate for that, but they end up overcompensating or overcorrecting. And when you do that, it doesn't end up working. It actually just makes things worse. And if you do it too many times in that overcorrected way, that muscle memory starts to sink in, and then you kind of live that way from that point forward. And you do that technique or you do that thing in whatever your sport is in that way instead of doing it the correct way. Where I feel like that's what happened to me as I overcorrected after that really hard experience that I had. So when I founded Speaking Your Brand in 2015, I was very intentional about not wanting it to be all about me. I use the name Speaking Your Brand. The website is speakingyourbrand.com. It's not my name. I know a lot of coaches and consultants go with their name, which is totally fine. I just had this vision that this company was going to be about more than me, which is true, but I also feel like it was probably related to some of these other experiences. I always knew that I wanted to bring on other speaking coaches. Of course, you all know our lead speaking coach, Diane Diaz. She's been on this podcast a lot, our LinkedIn live shows, etc. And I'm so grateful for her and all the incredible work that she does with our clients. And again, I am happy to put the spotlight on her and to share the spotlight with her as well as with our other coaches and other team members. So all of that is fine. But then here is what happens, is that I will get invitations for things and invitations for really prominent things. And my first thought, I kid you not, my first thought is to think, who else besides me could do this? Can I send this invitation to someone else? Or can I reply back to the person who is making the invitation, making the request, and suggest someone else? And it's kind of ridiculous because number one, they asked me, so they vetted me, they found me, they feel like I'm a good fit for their keynote speech or for their board, whatever they're asking me for. Yet my first impulse is to try to put the spotlight on someone else. So now that I recognize that that's my first default response, I let it sit for a moment and I don't email that back right away. Literally, sometimes I've typed it and then I go back and delete and I type yes, I would love to participate. This happened recently. I'm going to be delivering a keynote talk at an organization, and I am so honored to be doing it. I cannot wait. It's my first in-person speaking engagement since before COVID. That's coming up in September 2021. And then also I was recently asked to be on a board for a prominent organization here in Orlando, where I have an opportunity to network and to connect with other prominent women in the area. And both of those times I was like, oh, maybe I can think of someone else. But no, like I said yes. So progress is being made. And so as I mentioned in the intro, also with our Brave Bold Beyond live virtual summits is realizing that, yes, I wanted to put the spotlight on the women speakers, but also really recognizing that I needed to do more myself. And I talked about this a bit in episode 233, where I talked about the 3 thought leadership models: personality-driven, research-driven, and mission-driven. And really, I'm very much mission-driven in my thought leadership model, where I want to bring a lot of other people on. I want them to share the spotlight, which is totally fine. But I also recognize that as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, I need to bring more personality-based thought leadership into what I do while maintaining the mission. So this looks like more solo podcast episodes, which are coming up, doing more videos for this podcast. Right now, I'm recording a video to go along with the audio for this podcast. We're doing our LinkedIn live show, which is video content. We're also creating other videos. And I'm saying yes. So I'm saying yes by default to a lot of opportunities instead of finding a way to say no or to find someone else to put that spotlight on. And so I want you to start thinking about for yourself, and I've heard from a lot of listeners after listening to that episode 233 and the prior one, episode 232, which was, are you an influencer, an expert, or a thought leader? And I heard from a lot of women that they definitely see themselves as experts who want to transform into thought leaders. And they also recognize that they like being mission-driven, mission-based in their thought leadership, which I love as well. Yet I also recognize that you need to be personality-based as well as mission-based. And we can, of course, throw some research in for good measure. So here are some questions you can ask yourself, you can journal on, or you can talk to someone else about to see what could be holding you back from your thought leadership. And perhaps that is the way to your thought leadership. So here's the questions. What's something that you regularly avoid doing? So something that you avoid doing, related to business, visibility, putting yourself out there, thought leadership, that kind of thing. What's something you say no to or deflect? What story do you tell yourself about why you're not doing it, even if, especially if, you think you have a good or noble reason not to do it? And this was me, like, oh, I want to shine the spotlight on other people, so I'm going to say no, or I'm going to deflect it. So what is that story you're telling yourself? So think about those things. What are you saying no to? What are you avoiding? And what is a story you're telling yourself about why you're doing those things or not doing those things? Now, the second set of questions is thinking about what you help your clients with. So what's your business about? What drew you to the work that you're doing? Why was it important to you to do this work and to help the type of people that you help? And are you doing that thing for yourself? Or do you avoid or not do that thing for yourself? And I think of the parable of the cobbler's children who have no shoes. And I love that parable because it applies to so many things that I do. And it's that you have a cobbler who makes shoes. So he's so busy or she's so busy making shoes for everyone else in the village that their own children don't have shoes because they're the last to get it done. So that happens so often in our businesses that we don't do the work that we do with our clients, we don't do on ourselves. So sometimes it could be just we run out of time yet. I don't think it's just a time management issue. I think that we're not doing it for ourselves, for our own businesses for a reason. There's a story in there somewhere about why that's not happening. And what prompted this was I was talking to a podcast host recently. I'm a guest on her podcast, and we were talking about this idea of thought leadership. And she mentioned to me that what she does for her clients, she recognizes that she's not doing for herself. And she even told me that there's a story in there about why she's not doing it. So if we dig into that story, I'm sure we would find a reason, and that could be her way to her thought leadership. So think about that, about the work that you do and the clients you help. Next set of questions is, what are you judgmental about in others? Or where does jealousy creep in when you see what others are doing? So a lot of times when we see other people who seem to be really active on social media or seem to be doing a lot of things or putting my case, putting the spotlight on themselves, it's not so much that I'm judgmental, but I think, I don't have the time for that, or I don't have the desire for that. And yet I know I do, but I'm telling myself a different story. And if you think about jealousy, not jealousy in the sense that it's not about wanting something bad to happen to the other person or wanting them not to have that thing. It's more that envy is a normal human emotion that can tell us something helpful about what we desire. What we desire for ourselves, we can sometimes be envious in other people. So again, not to put them down, but to think for ourselves, well, what is it that they're doing that maybe I want for myself? And it's okay to want it. I think that's the thing, the message that we get as young girls and as women a lot is that it's not okay for us to have desires. It's not okay for us to want things, but it is. So if something is prompting some type of jealousy in you, think about what it could be that you're desiring. Next set of questions. What messages did you get growing up? What was rewarded and what was looked down upon? If you think about that related to this idea of what are you saying no to? What are you avoiding? What are you deflecting? What experiences in your life have left a big impact? And how did those experiences change your behavior? So thinking back to when I was chairperson of the Democratic Party here in that county, that experience of that backlash that I got left a big impact, and it caused a behavior change and me shunning the spotlight. So think about if you've had similar experiences. And finally, question, what can you start saying yes to? Is there a story you need to tell others? Is there a story you want to tell others regarding something that happened to you, something that's meaningful to you? And along with that, who has earned the right to hear that story? You may not be ready or want to share that publicly, say on a podcast or on social media, but is there a group or is there someone that has earned the right to hear that story that can help you to start breaking through where you may be holding yourself back, especially regarding what your thought leadership could be? Because here's how I see what thought leadership is. It's your big idea. So what is that idea that you have, that viewpoint, that perspective, that paradigm shift that you've had, plus the personal story that goes with it? What happened? What experience happened that led to that paradigm shift, that led to that change in perspective that you have, that you want to share with others? And then the third component is having the emotional courage to share that story. And again, you may not be ready to share it far and wide, but maybe there's a closer group that you can share it with. And this really is what we see happen in our Thought Leader Academy is the women come together and they start getting to know each other. They start building that trust, and we help create that container, that safe container, that trusted container. And then they start sharing their stories. And when they share it with us in the smaller group, then they build that muscle, they build that confidence and the validation to go share it with more people. I know and I believe wholeheartedly that by sharing our stories, by sharing what matters to us, is that how we change things for the better. So if you're interested in joining us for our Thought Leader Academy, go to speakingyourbrand.com/academy to get all of the details. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/academy. You're welcome to schedule a consultation call with us. I would love to talk with you about your ideas, your goals, and how we could work together if that would be a good fit for you. We have a new series starting all about what it means to evolve from an expert to a thought leader. So make sure to hit subscribe or hit follow in your podcast app so you don't miss these episodes that are coming up. And I thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I know I mentioned some previous episodes that you can go back to and listen to if you haven't already. I'll make sure to include those in the show notes. You can find the show notes by going to speakingyourbrand.com/240. So the episode number, speakingyourbrand.com/240. Until next time, thanks for listening.